Ariel Helwani in Saitama, Japan at the Saitama Super Arena just hours before the UFC 144 weigh-ins, and we're being joined by Mark Fischer, the Managing Director of UFC Asia. And Mark, thank you very much for the time. Obviously very excited for Saturday night's event here in Japan, the UFC's return to Japan. Obviously we can talk to Dana and Lorenzo about the UFC's return, but you probably know about this a little more in-depthly. I mean, you've been working here, you live in China, but you obviously have been doing a lot of great work over the past year for the UFC's expansion into Asia. I know the event hasn't happened just yet, but thus far, Dana says it's been a success. Do you agree?
Absolutely. A lot of people said that we wouldn't have this type of success, that MMA was on the decline here in Japan and it's not the right time to come back, but we felt differently. We felt with a fresh start, the UFC coming in clean, a new organization, the best MMA organization in the world, that we would excite the deep base of martial arts fans here, and I think that's what's happened, and we're just about to sell out today. If not, we will be tomorrow. We're very excited about that. It's a great success.
Now, obviously this is a massive arena. It can hold, I think, around 50, 60 or 70,000 people. What will it be configured for the event on Saturday night?
It's going to be close to 20,000, just shy, I think. It's going to be probably 19 and change.
And what kind of education process have you had to go through? Because, you know, we went on the streets of Japan, and there are some people who obviously know about Vanderlei Silva and Quinton Rampage Jackson, but there are a lot who know about Pride, but not much about UFC. It's almost like they've been missing from the last few years here in MMA. What kind of education process have you had to do to get people to know that this is now the top organization?
Well, we've done a lot of PR leading up in the last couple months. We've certainly had good coverage in a lot of the sports media here and a lot of the MMA media. We think this event itself is going to change a lot of that. This is kind of a coming out party, not only for our awareness and educating the fans about what UFC is here in Japan, but in a way it's a start to the momentum we hope to build across Asia, to educating people what is the UFC. Why are we one of the best sports in the world? We think we're the most exciting sport in the world, and how can we bring that excitement and everything that's great about the UFC to here in Japan and to the rest of Asia? We think this is the start of that.
This re-entry into Asia and Japan is a lot different than, say, the UFC's reintroduction to Brazil, and even to a degree what's going on in the UK, because you're not on network television here. You're on a smaller channel, WOW. And I know there has been a deal that was just reached recently with TV Tokyo, but it's sort of late night. So, you know, how do you sort of get the people to know about the event if you're on a smaller sort of premium channel?
Well, we've done quite a bit of public advertising, for starters. Secondly, we have WOW doing some unscrambled, so they're reaching about 2.5 million with their main broadcast, but they're going to be doing a number of unscrambled broadcasts that go out to 30 million households, which is 80% of Japan. In addition to that, again, we think this event is going to be a bit of a watershed where people see, oh, wow, that's the UFC. What an incredibly exciting event. It was successful in the amount of buzz it created and the amount of people that actually bought tickets and came out to Saitama to see it. Let's wake up and see what this thing is. And I think in the future, this is going to lay the groundwork for a very good network, free-to-air network deal. So that, again, it's the start of something big in the future. And I think it's going to be a catalyst for a lot of that.
As someone who has lived in this country for Asia for over, in the continent of Asia for over a decade or so, how do you think the fans here will receive the UFC? Because when we go to the events in the United States, it's a lot of action, a lot of hoopla, a lot of hype, but here the fans are a little different, right?
They're generally more quiet when the fights are going on. I think they're maybe a little bit more used to that pro wrestling where there's a good guy and a bad guy. So there's some definitely differences here. It'll be interesting to see. I think there'll be a mixture of kind of that traditional Japanese way of watching and the regular UFC way of watching, which is going out there and being very vocal and the fans yelling at every move. So there'll probably be a mixed crowd, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Why do you think the sport has suffered so greatly over the last few years here in Japan?
I think it has to do with basically two things. I think a lot of the domestic promotions here ran into a lot of financial difficulties. Were not able to stay up on their promises, both to the fighters involved, as well as to fans, as well as to suppliers, etc. So there's a lot of broken promises, I think, mainly because of financial issues. Secondly, there was involvement with organized crime, quite frankly, on the part of a lot of these domestic promotions, and that organized crime, the Yakuza here, has really been marginalized in Japan society over the last 10 years. It's been a fairly concerted effort by the government to do that. So it's very much out of favor. Anything associated with it, out of favor. Again, so we're coming in clean, fresh, and I think people are ultimately going to respond to the UFC and appreciate what the UFC is doing for the sport here because of that.
When the UFC tried to relaunch Pride, we know about the issues that they had. Jamie Pollock, who works for the UFC, was sort of the figurehead here, and he dealt with a lot of issues, and ultimately it couldn't happen for a whole host of reasons. You mentioned the Yakuza. Have you had any pushback from them now that the UFC is coming back to Japan?
Not that's come to my attention. I think we have a very good partner here on this event, Dentsu. I think they've run some interference on that regard, but it's been a pretty smooth process so far. So,
and for the American fans that don't know about Dentsu, and I've heard this company name a lot over the last week, who exactly are they, and what are they doing? What's their involvement in this event?
Well, first of all, Dentsu is arguably the largest advertising and marketing agency in the entire world. They dominate Japan. They have all the biggest brands on their roster, all the biggest media are dealing with Dentsu in one shape or form. So they're a huge media marketing and advertising agency, and so very much of a blue chip company. They do have a large sports marketing organization as well that works on all kinds of sports properties across the world and here in Japan. And so they really are the number one in this business for this market. And so they've been great. They have tremendous connections. They've got tremendous resources. And they've been in charge of ticket selling, of promoting the tickets here. Normally we self-promote, but in a new market, a foreign market, we will occasionally use promoters like Dentsu, and they're really the best ones that we could find.
And who do you consider to be the UFC's biggest competition here? Is it the ONE FCs and the Legend FCs of the world? Is it just something else? Is it pro wrestling? I mean, how does it differ from what we see in the United States?
I don't really see that we have competition in the form of another organization per se. I think our biggest challenge is not a competitor, but it's the whole process of educating and building awareness, explaining what is the sport of MMA, where does UFC as the global leader and the best and the premium brand fit in. So it's really getting it out there. It's a whole process of getting exposure and education for everybody.
And obviously you're back here in Japan. We've heard rumors, whispers of perhaps a show in Korea, India, the Philippines. Anything you could tell us? Can you break some news? What's the next stop on the UFC's Asian tour?
We're having a ton of discussions right now, and I can't break any news because really nothing's set yet, but we're hopeful that in terms of this part of Asia, we're going to be doing something in November of 2012, and we're looking at about 3 or 4 different potential options for that in the Far East.
Would it be a new market or perhaps back here in Japan?
We think it would be a new market at this point, would be our preference. We do hope to return to Japan with a similar event, but maybe in another year, and try to make this an annual thing. Again, a lot of those discussions have to unfold over the next couple months.
Well, first things first, UFC 144. It goes down Saturday night live on pay-per-view. As you can see behind us, the cage is being built right now. And of course, the headlining act is Frankie Edgar versus Benson Henderson for the UFC lightweight title. Thank you so much for the time, and good luck tomorrow night.
Thank you, Ariel. It's a pleasure.